Thank you so much, Krishna, for that generous introduction. And of course, thank you, Map Academy and Varun and Preksha, for having me here. It's really a privilege to be here, to be able to share my work and my creative journey with you on this incredible platform. And it's not an opportunity I take lightly. So I want to say thank you again, and to everyone who's registered here and who's plugged in today and who will probably be watching this talk online later on. So the way I'll structure my presentation is like this. I'll stay only with the works that have taken shape in book form in order to keep it concise, or works that have been contemplated as books, either as works in progress or simply as an exercise in thinking about a body of work. And I'll end with a footnote on JOJO. And if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about projects that are ongoing or that are about to come out. So, a short introduction. I am trained as a photographer, and I still practice as a photographer, but in my artistic practice, I mostly work with images that already exist in circulation, either in print or on the internet. I also studied English literature, economics, and history as minors, and I did 2 years of psychology in junior college. And I still marry some of the concepts that I learned in those fields of study with my study of photography and with how I work with images in my artistic practice today. I love working with the book form because it allows me to think of images as relational, and it also allows me to think through the book as an object. So it brings in multiple different elements of design, editing, sequencing, and other wonderful processes that go into making a book. So I'll start by talking about an early work. It's a book from 2014 that I called Apparitions. It was my first book after graduating from art school, and it kind of set the tone for where my practice was heading. I lived and studied in France for 5 years, and like every homesick student, I would spend extended periods on video calls over Skype with my friends and family. And at times, I would be unceremoniously left to stare at the ceiling or the wall, or, sometimes visited by the cat in the house or like random family members entering the frame. And I started to take screenshots without really any intention, but maybe as a kind of desperate attempt to hold on to this passing of time. And over time, I realized that I was doing this a lot. And when I realized that, I started to take these screenshots with intention. And of course, Skype was, one of those technologies that became a verb eventually. And in fact, it was finally put to rest this year. Um, but usually during these calls, the images was a bit, it was, the call was a bit choppy. Images were blurry. So, I knew that somebody was there on the other side of the screen, but it was kind of like a stand-in for a presence, and a representation of a person rather than the person themselves. And I think that this the fact that the image was blurry and this kind of low fidelity of the image um, made me a little bit nostalgic. Made me think of the idea that imaging technology is changing, and maybe in the future, I don't know, we'll be working with like holograms instead of video calls or something. And so I started to think about that, and eventually I started directing my mother and telling her to hold the camera here, take me to this room. And it became more of a participatory process, and a more meaningful way to spend time on these, video calls, and again, try to hold on to this passage of time somehow. And so this was the outcome of that exercise. It was a book with a very small print run. I made it in Bombay in an edition of 50 copies. And this was kind of what the edit looked like. I don't know if you can see clearly, but you can see the kind of Skype circle on the bindi of my grandmother. And, the image on the right is a series of images of, a sneeze that I got. So trying to hold on to these little moments over Skype at the time. I really do like collecting these little digital artifacts of like technology that's going to, perhaps become obsolete. And in fact, it has now. Um, And this, like I said, paved the way for work that I would do later. Um, it set, I mean, it made the direction for, me thinking about technology and also thinking about participatory practices, particularly when it came to working with my family, and the people that I love and care about. Um, I remember this one time that, this was maybe I was away for like over a year at one point, and my mother had come to visit me. And I remember seeing her and being shocked by the presence, because on Skype, you don't really see, you don't see the wrinkles, you don't see the walls peeling, you don't see people aging. And that kind of set off also, a train of thought for thinking about um, what this space of the internet is, and how it's kind of a stand-in for relationships, and it's not really an extension of a physical relationship. And so, the act of making images over Skype kind of became a way to form new relationships in this virtual, or a new way of forming a relationship in this virtual space, if at all. Um, yeah, and I kind of really like how these images became a little bit painterly because of the pixelation as well. Um, yeah, so I mean, I think because of that, in the end, it kind of felt more like images of absence rather than images of my family in a different space. Then in 2015, I moved back to India, and that's when I started to make another participatory work with my family, but this time from inside of the family home. I moved back for many reasons, and one of them being that, my grandparents were aging, and I knew that time with them was kind of running out. And while we had many differences, they were very important figures for me, and an important source of learning in my life. And my only link to them, or the missing piece that would have tied, sort of their generation to mine, would have been my father, who passed away when I was quite young. And so when I moved back, the camera kind of became my excuse to spend time with them. And I thought by doing that, I would get to know myself better by learning about where they come from and, trying to fill that gap between our generations. But through the process, like a totally different story emerged. And I realized that I was learning more about my grandmother and her sort of resistance to, the family that she grew up in and the situation in which they got married, but also about love, and about how through their life of, over 90 years together, literally, they, how that love kind of took shape and how it evolved and what it means to spend your life with another human being as a partner. And that's when I kind of decided to make this a book. So in 2020, actually, is when I um, made it available for a wider audience and not just as a gift for my grandparents. And I call this book Dori. Dori means thread in Gujarati. And for me, the book was a thread that kind of tied me to them. And eventually, it would be the thread that ties them and their story to generations of the future. Again, this book was made in India, in Delhi this time, in an edition of 500 copies. And I'm going to play a little video that I made um, of this book, um, so that I don't have to, yeah. Let me know if you can't hear or see the screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tanto, no? Io adoro. E che tanto più, tanto più. Si sono parlato. Infatti, non c'era. Ma c'era io. Perché lo fai giorno. In cui ne faccio chiaro, per me che fanno la musica, non ci fanno, non ci fanno, non ci fanno. Ito yung lahat sa mga channel ko nila. Kaya natin ang cloud ng how we how we Siguro matagal, di man rin nakikita. Dito sigla yung PhD ko. Nagkakami PhD ko. Yung to take care of myself. Maraming much. Pero, paano ba? Dapat ang dami
So my grandfather had a speech impediment, so it was very difficult to understand what he was saying a lot of the times. And initially, when I was making this book for them, and I was wondering, should I, put this out there? I mean, I second guessed it a lot. It's like, why should it be a book? Why should it be something that it's something that's so personal about my family? Does it need to be out in the world? And I remember when I decided to make it a book, I approached um, Virangana Kumari Solanki, who is a writer and a curator, and I asked her, and I told her about the work, and I asked her to if she would write an essay about the book, and she started to share, her stories about her grandfather and the various ways in which she resonated with this work. And over time, I kind of got more confident that, okay, this work isn't actually about me and them and what I set out to do, because once the book was out there, the kind of responses that I received were mainly about people and their own experiences with their grandparents, or how they wish they had photographed them. Or some people, I would take it to book fairs in various parts of the world, and in no matter where in the world it was, in the West or the East, I'd have people come and buy the book either as a gift to articulate what they feel for their family, or because it's something that they resonated with. And I think that's one of the things that I love about this form, is that it can travel, and the outcome was that I managed to reach out to a community around the world just because I took the time to articulate this work and put it in a book form. And so that kind of gave me confidence to, keep doing this. And I think that is an outcome enough for what we do, I feel. Um, then also in 2020, the world would turn on its head, and by that time I was back in Bombay, and I was in Bombay during the COVID-19 lockdowns with my mother. um Between 2015 and 2020, I traveled a lot, mainly for work, and I was away for 6 to 7 months a year, and in Bombay and in and around India for the rest of that time. And my mother worked as a travel agent, and she kind of fell into it because of, circumstances after my dad passed away. And then she had to shut down her business again because of circumstances. And, after 30 years of working. And by this time, the verb Skype had been replaced by the verb Zoom, which kind of became the cornerstone of how we were, staying in touch and keeping communities alive, and also accessing information and news. And it was a difficult time for everyone. I mean, we were protected, compared to most or many other people in the country. And so again, the same impulse that made me want to kind of participate or have this participatory process in apparitions was the reason why I started this work, which I eventually called Chroma Key. Um, and the idea was to ask my mom to pull out, make a wish list of places that she would like to go to once all this is over, and pull out itineraries from her, her travel agency to some of these places. So we started to simulate these travels, starting with Japan. And the idea was, thinking about Zoom as this platform through which we were traveling, like through the screen anyway, to keep our friendships and relationships alive. And also this idea of Zoom backgrounds that would allow you to actually simulate yourself in a different place and a different time. Um, Except, I was doing this on a Microsoft Surface Pro, so the graphics card hadn't really caught up to what Zoom was offering as this virtual reality experience. And yeah, it kind of made me think of this space of the computer screen as a space where time and place kind of collapses. You can have the past and the present and imagine a future, and all of that is in the same space. And when you try to simulate this reality, there are cracks in these images which bring in parts of your present into this image. And it was really an experiment, but I think for me it really accurately, in many ways accurately represented all of the feelings of that time, the feeling of being overwhelmed, all of this information that we were consuming, through this kind of digital overloading, a lack of clarity, confusion. And I think that, these sort of broken images that overlap each other and blend into each other represented that feeling for me. Um, and eventually, we kind of, the lockdown opened. We even traveled to Japan and completed that circle, because I had gone on a work trip and I took her along. And it was, and then for me, the project kind of stopped there. And then later on, I took the work to a workshop in Jakarta with um, a Japanese bookmaker, Yumi Goto. And for this version of the book, I kind of treated it as a photo dump, or a kind of coming together of all the elements of the research that went into making those single images. So the book, it had all the screenshots, it had maps of the places that we had, pinned out and to go to, reviews, like Google reviews of hotels we had looked at, little like images of things, the touristic things that one should see in Japan. And it was kind of like this, the idea was to simulate a virtual journey, but also have all of the different ways in which a place can be imaged or pictured or imagined, in the form of the book. Um, so, it was a very different visual vocabulary and that I've worked with before. And at the moment, it still exists in a dummy form. It's still an unrealized book. Um, and the only form it currently has is an NFT experiment I made at the time, which I lost the password of. So it's just living for free on the internet somewhere. Um, then after Apparitions, in 2019, I self-published a book called In Today's News. And this first version was called Alpha Males and Women Power, which was a caption I found in the newspaper. So this book, by this time I was already living in India around 4 years now, and it was becoming more and more urgent, for me to respond to the kind of the environment that I was living in. And this was also around the time when like the Me Too conversations were fresh. And this book actually started as Instagram stories, as an exercise in editing. I was at a workshop in Hyderabad, and I wake up and look at the newspaper and use Instagram stories, which I was also just getting used to try and figure out, what is this good for. And the more I did that, the more I realized that it was actually revealing to me more what was in my mind, rather than what I was looking at in the images. And eventually it kind of became this book where I'm taking images from newspapers in India and putting them together, taking them out of their original context and putting them into a different context to kind of try and reveal a dominant ideology, or the way I feel as a woman who's born and raised in India and is currently living there. Um, the next version of this book is called Dance of Democracy, and it's coming out actually in a few months. It's in production right now, and that's going to respond to the socio-political and economic climate that we've been in over the last decade or so. Um, and again, thinking of lo-fi, because we mentioned that in the text, just these artifacts, the fact that, print media is slowly also disappearing, and newsprint has this kind of dot grain texture to it if you zoom in. And I also like this idea of, images becoming words, and how that language and the meaning is not, or the meaning is not inherent in images, but it depends on how we read it through our own cultural biases, and what an image can do when the context is changed. Um, so that's a little bit about in today's news. The other thing I'll say is that this was the first book that I published under the name JoJo. So, by now I was thinking of self-publishing, and publishing was becoming more and more present in how I was thinking about working with images. And I thought maybe I should separate it, from my name and allow it to exist as a separate sort of entity. And that's how the publishing imprint, Editions JOJO, was born. Um, it's called JoJo because my father used to call me that when I was a child, after the runner Florence Griffith Joyner, who broke the 100-meter, the record for the 100-meter dash the year that I was born. And for me, it really kind of represents the things that I wanted to remember or keep in mind through my publishing practice, which is, to um, stay close to my stories, and remember to play and to not lose the childlike perspective when engaging with the world and with our everyday realities. And I mean, play is a child's activity. It's the basis of from which, curiosity, wonder, fearlessness, experimentation, all of that stems from. And I think that one imagines the world as a child, with the building blocks that we have in our hands, and I think this is also true of an artistic practice. And I think that, yeah, I hope that Jojo kind of helped guide, that vision, for what it's become now. Um, which brings me to Editions JoJo. Um, so while it might have started as a self-publishing alter ego, it has now blossomed into a thing of its own, with collaborators dipping in and out. We now publish photo books, not just self-publish. And I like to think that we also participate in creating a culture around the medium via things like international distribution efforts for both JoJo books as well as other indie publications that are being made in the region. We run a small library and bookshop in Mumbai, in Shivaji Park, with my colleague Parikshit, who handles, the space. We also organize traveling shows and exhibitions from the collection at the library. Um, and in addition to all of that, we have a virtual space where we have a podcast, a YouTube channel, and we also organize in-person events where we facilitate dialogue around photography and photo books. and other workshops and things like that that facilitate photo book making, but also the space also acts as a platform for anybody who's making photo books in the region and who wants to connect to their audiences. For money, sometimes we selectively take on commission works as a studio and as editorial consultancy. I want to say here that the library was actually something that I took on the management of in 2020. So the library was actually originally started by a collective called the Bind Collective that used to operate in India. And when they sort of moved to different parts of the world, and their practices kind of moved away from running the library. And so I took on the management of it, and since then it's grown in its collection and has gone in all these different directions. So I just wanted to acknowledge their contribution actually to the photo book ecosystem in India right now. So here are some of the books that we've published. Now, I've already showed you in today's news. The one on the bottom right is a little zine that I made during a residency called Cake Cutting. And it will probably be revived in a different form in the future. But it's also, again, looking at images of cutting cake in Indian politics on through online news websites. And the one on the top right actually marks a kind of shift into publishing at large. So this was a book that revived an Instagram account that had kind of shut down because of internet trolling. And it's an anonymous book because the person who started the account, they wanted their identity to be protected. And it was essentially a project originally called New WhatsApp University that invited artists and citizens to contribute um, their own good morning messages. So like subversive or protest good morning messages in response to, the climate around the CAA and the NRC protests that were going on. The idea being that, you make these and then you send them back into your WhatsApp family groups, um, which was very problematic, at least for me at the time. And so we, downloaded all of the images from the Instagram archive. And when that happened, the images were very pixelated, and it was nothing more than the information. It was less about the image quality, but what they were standing in for. And that was very interesting for me. It made me think of, like, I don't know, your family's box of wedding photos that's in the attic, and then they suddenly got like dust or, mildew, and they have these, markers of time on them. So to me, this was this pixelation and the breaking down of this image that was stored purely as information by platforms like Instagram. It marked this passage of time, and the revival in print kind of kept that artifact. When designing this book, we were kind of thinking of how the form and the design also contributes to an understanding of the project. So, the colors of the cover imitate WhatsApp's kind of color scheme, and that the kappa board, the board that we've used kind of, to me, look like the little squiggles on your WhatsApp chat. The idea of the scroll was also, to like a kind of like a calendar, and also the idea of scrolling through an Instagram feed. And if you look at the book from the side, actually, the color gradient also forms a kind of rainbow, which goes from day to night. So those were some of the thought processes behind designing the book. Good Morning was also featured as part of a compendium on sustainable photo book publishing, and it started off, our journey in many ways, in thinking about the kind of materials we're using while making books, and just thinking about being a little more sustainable, working with more local materials and local print and production possibilities when making books. Except that the coil was a recycled plastic coil that we had hand carried in suitcases from the United States. Because it's actually very difficult to find colored coil, in India, because they make it in bulk and they only make it in two colors, and it's a whole process. Um, then the next book we published is a book that's very close to my heart. I really love the work of Aparna Nori, and it was a very special collaboration. It was more like a friendship where we shared the load of publishing, and it was a format in, I mean, financing a book, distributing a book, bringing, another photographer's creative practice into this form. For me, it was the first time. And I'm very proud of this work. And it's actually a collaboration of Aparna with her son. So her son was studying at boarding school for many, many years, and they would write letters to each other. And so she collected all those letters and the drawings that he would make of the birds he would see. And when he would come home, they would, through conversations, make images together about the way he was feeling. And so she calls it, a safe space for her son, who was quickly growing up and going to be an adult soon. And also for her as an artist, it was the first time she was negotiating her role as both a mother and an artist, something that she had had difficulty with doing earlier on in her career. So, it was a turning point for her, turning point for her son, and a turning point for me as a publisher. And we made an edition of 330 books and a short um, hand-bound special edition where she had these cyanotypes that she made with pressings of flowers that she found at his school. So this is called How to Climb a Tree. Um, as I mentioned, we also run, this is images from the library in Mumbai. It's in a garage. It's a tiny space. We have multiple cats, only two are allowed to enter the library. And we host a number of events in there as well. The library itself was, a lot of people came together to contribute. Some people gave us money to build it. People like, Bharat Floorings donated the floor. We found a lot of wood that was already in the garage, which we kind of repurposed into, maybe you can see the wood on the windows on the right. So we used some of the wood there. We knocked out the center panels of these doors that came out from the first floor apartment and made that the front door. So it was kind of like a bricolage of sorts, and it's slowly becoming more and more organized and sophisticated. But it's our little cubby hole, and we love it. It's located in Shivaji Park. It's accessible by train, by bus. It's in the, it's in a lovely little Art Deco neighborhood by the sea, and we try to organize also things in the neighborhood. So we have these architecture walks that are led by Nikhil Mahashur of Walkitecture, who does this heritage walk in the neighborhood of the Art Deco buildings that are also slowly disappearing. And then the walk eventually ends at the library, and we usually try to have a selection on that bottom shelf of books that correspond to architecture, urban planning, and things that might resonate with people coming through from the walk. These are images from some of the workshops that we do. So on the top is a bookbinding workshop. At the bottom is an editing workshop with these artists, Abhishek and Joyana, who are also in the process of publishing a book. And on the right is portfolio reviews with the photographer and artist Max Pinkers while he was visiting Mumbai earlier this year. So, like I said, we also, have a distribution arm where we distribute our own books through our participation in book fairs around the world. But when we do that, we also carry other books that have been independently published or, from small presses in India and, in South Asia in some cases. And here are some images of the book fair. We call this Project JOJO Ambassador, and our symbol is this ambassador car that, a workshop participant had sketched for us many, many years ago, and that we still use. Again, part of our distribution efforts, whenever we get to travel, we try and visit bookshops that'll host us for talks, to present the books that we publish, and sometimes to present in the form of exhibitions, books that are being published in the region. So here are images from an exhibition called Kagazi Perhan, Publishing and Resistance in South Asia. The exhibition, actually, the idea for the exhibition came together through a conversation with the photographer Matthew Asselin, who runs this initiative called Double Dummy Studios in Arles in France. And eventually we received a grant from the Archila Foundation to put this together. So the show brings together artist books that look at publishing as a form of resistance. And it actually starts from photography books and artist books and expands to other forms of printed media, like pamphlets, magazines, posters, other forms of publishing that act as forms of resistance and that are kind of, giving us a kind of broader picture of what artists are responding to in our region. So the image on the top left is from Printed Matter in New York, and the bottom left is from Archila in Shantiniketan. The last version of this exhibition was in Goa earlier this year, and so every time the exhibition moves, it changes shape, and the the works highlighted on the walls are usually include artists who are from these places as well. And then we also try to have, parallel sort of conversations that activate the exhibition, like the image on the top right, which is from a panel we had organized in Arl for the first version of the show that opened at Double Dummy Studios. And this was at, a book fair that was running in parallel called Podesta, where we had Dr. Shahidul Alam in conversation with Bill Shipsey. And on the bottom right is a panel we organized at the Dia Foundation with Raha Balana, Cheryl Mukherjee, and Barun Nair, who is now at the MAP Academy and who invited me to speak here today. Again, an image on the left of the Turbine Bagh project by Sophia Karim, where she looks at samosa packets as, a form of publishing and a form of circulating resistances from across South Asia. And the image on the right is from an exhibition we produced at the Dilip P. Ramal Art Gallery at the NCPA in Mumbai, and it was an overview of Max Pinkfors' publishing practice. So I believe that, perhaps there are some people here who, through my presentation, have been thinking, maybe what is a photo book? Maybe you Googled it already and found this page show up. And for those of you, don't worry, we've got you covered. But I don't think I'm going to go into it because we've already released a podcast episode that goes into this question in more depth than I have time for today. So what I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to play a little, clip from the beginning of that episode if we have time. How are we doing on time, Krishna? Are we okay?
Yes, we do have time for we can go on for another 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So I'll play a couple of minutes from the podcast for you. So it's only going to be the audio. The podcast is hosted by three of us. There's the artists Adira Thekuvetil and Akshay Mahajan and myself. And the podcast was actually supported by and continues to be supported by Art South Asia Project's Publications Grant and by Photo South Asia. So here is a short clip of this episode, which is also with Varun Nair and Leslie Martin.
So, like, is a cookbook a photo book if it has a lot of pictures of cooking? Is a travel book, which was a big thing at least in the late 20th century, early 21st century, is that a photo book because it has a lot of photographs of travel?
As you may have guessed, this episode is about the photo book. The episode was prompted by two things. The first is a series of conversations between Adira, Akshay, and myself, and the second is a trip we made to New York late last year. In the first half, you will hear us trying to wrap our heads around the photo book phenomenon, ranting about the market and challenges in production and distribution. In the second half of the episode, we hear from Leslie Martin and Varun Nair, both of whom we had a chance to meet and speak with when Adira and I traveled for Printed Matter New York's Art Book Fair, where we presented the exhibition Kagazi Perahan, Publishing and Resistance in South Asia. Now, ironically, the entire experience of going to New York kind of presented solutions for many of the concerns we raised in the first half around visibility and mobility of books from our region. But listen on, and hopefully it'll address some of the questions and concerns you have of your own, or perhaps give you something to think about if this is the first time you're encountering the term photo books.
A photo book to me is a kind of subset of a conceptual art book which heroes the photograph or a bunch of photographs or the use of photography or an artist's use of photography.
It's a body of work that uses photography as its primary language it has a certain sense of time. The vehicle itself allows one to experience photography in a way that would not be possible when you're looking at photographs in the context of, let's say, a gallery or a newspaper or a magazine or any other context in which we engage with photography. If I were to think about what a photo book is, I don't think I would have a very clear definition of it, because in my mind, it is still not an actual category. So yeah, for me, it's a photo book is just happens to be a book which has more photographs than words. Maybe that's the way I could think about it, and in a ratio kind of a way. Or maybe it has only photographs and no words. That's also a way I guess it can exist. But I'm not sure whether it needs to be a separate category, which is why I find the term photo book to be very confusing.
Like one word together, not
One word.
one word.
Okay, I'll stop there. But you can listen to this, wherever you get your podcasts or on the JoJo website. So I guess, maybe this would be a good time to conclude and say that the photo book is not a straightforward. There is no one definition. It's a way of working with photographs within the form of a book, and with an artistic intent in some way, but it's evolving quite quickly, particularly here. And I think that because we're in such an early stage in working with this form, um, the possibilities are many. There's so much room for experimenting, there's so much room for innovation, and really owning the format and the possibilities of printing in India, the ways in which we can use our history of printing and paper making and binding, and to adopt this medium as something that will really shape shift according to in the hands of the different types of creative practitioners that we see here on forth. So I think I'll stop there, and I won't go into the upcoming projects because that'll just go on forever. Um, so thank you so much for listening and for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kaamna, for a wonderful presentation. And thanks for sharing your works with us. I kind of love how you make these artistic interventions to media that all of us sort of take for granted and then turn them into something so personal and political, especially with the WhatsApp good morning messages, which I'm sure all of us are quite familiar with. I think we can open up the space for questions now. So yeah, we already have one question from Shivani. Thanks, Kaamna. Very insightful talk. I have one question. How do you decide which projects to publish under Editions JOJO? Is there a curatorial instinct that ties them all together?
At the moment, most of our projects are invited, and the curatorial instinct, for better or for worse, is mine. But maybe that'll change in the future. We've been receiving a lot of submissions as well. So, we're still keeping, like I said, under this umbrella of, personal stories, play, experimentation within the genre. And that's kind of the curatorial direction at the moment. Also, I'm really interested in looking at practitioners who are working with found images, or, just thinking differently about how they're representing their lived experiences without, maybe challenging the documentary form also a little bit. So that's how I'm thinking about it right now. But yeah.
Can you maybe walk us through how an idea sort of evolves from, from the immediate curiosity and that spark that you have, like what happens in the studio, and then all the way to publishing, like the process that goes on for a photo book?
I think that depends from project to project. So, like, for example, for obviously for the self-published books, it was a very solitary process. Like I said, with apparitions and later with In Today's News, I was kind of doing it by accident and then with intention, and then thinking about it in the book form and kind of looking for images that would fit an edit, and then go over multiple edits, multiple combinations, until it reads in a way that is satisfying to me. With Aparna, it was collaborative. For example, she was working on the design already. Then we had editing sessions together where we were kind of challenging some of the decisions in the book, through multiple conversations. We were even recording some of our conversations that we can go back to them in formal settings, in informal settings. We workshopped it together at the same Yumi Goto workshop, actually, where that's when I first met her and saw the work. I mean, I'd met her before, but that's when I had first seen the work. So, that process was really just the two of us coming together and working together to achieve the outcome. We even went to the printers together. We lived in Hyderabad for like a couple of weeks and, worked on checking the prints, making sure the binding was right and all of those things. So we really shared the load there. So I think it really depends. I'm not the kind of publisher who would be like, okay, I have a vision for this book and I think it needs to be edited this way and look this way. And like it's more like a conversation. And I think if it's working with another artist, their vision is the priority, and I'll just weigh in wherever I can. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes. We have a couple of questions that are about how young artists can get into photo book making. Imrit has a question. What advice would you give to young artists or bookmakers who want to self-publish but feel intimidated by the process or resources? And there's a similar question as well from S. Roy. Thank you for curating such amazing works, truly insightful. I have a question. If somebody wants to try to make a photo book, where does he or she start? I'm an aspiring designer, and these things interest me a lot. Any habits you would suggest?
I think the best way to do it is to just do it, start making it, get comfortable with the medium, experiment. Um, it doesn't have to be expensive prints, it can be copy prints. There's so much information available online now. The internet is your school. Um, Platforms like this make it possible also to have information, available easily and for free. If there are people you admire or whose work you are curious about, just reach out to them and ask them how they do it, ask for a meeting. And most of the times you'll find that people are accessible. They'll give you the time, they'll give you, they'll give you their feedback if you want it. And other than that, we have so many more open calls in the country. We have more workshops being organized, online, offline, in India and abroad. There are lots of open calls for, self-published books, but there are also open calls for, dummies for awards and things like that. And that's one way to get visibility. I think the best way is really just to make multiple versions, show them to people whose feedback you trust, or whose responses you would want to have, and then keep chipping away at it. For example, we like to keep self-published books at the bookshop. Um, so, it doesn't matter what stage of your career you're in. We're happy to keep it there and, allow those books to connect to their audiences. We feature them in our newsletters when we can. And that's one way to do it. There are bookshops across the country now that will be willing to do that. So, if you've made a book that you're proud of, that you can stand behind, write to bookshops and see how they respond.
Thank you for that. Manikandan, I hope that answers your question as well. Devi has a question. Loved hearing about your work. Thank you. When working with socially politically charged material, how do you balance the personal experience and emotion with an analytical distance?
That's a great question. So in today's news was really, I found myself becoming an angry person. And I feel like over time, my work comes from two places. One is, a place of care and of love, and another is a place of anger and helplessness. And usually in the second case, I adopt the lens of absurdity. It's the only way that I can find, through humor, find distance in these experiences and then process them through a book like in today's, or through a process of like working with found images, for example. Um, and I think it's hard. It's you have to have that initial at least for me, I don't know if everybody has the same process, but for me, I need to have that initial outburst, which comes out in that first rough edit. And it kind of feels like, when you scribble in your diary and it's like incoherent when you're emotionally charged, and then you go back and then you try to form sentences, and then eventually that can become like, I don't know, a novel or like a poem or something. So it goes through those various stages, but it's also, I suppose, like a way of using photography as a kind of psychoanalysis, if you can, and or self psychoanalysis, and then working through those emotions and working through, what the triggers for that is, and eventually, finding vocabulary in theory or articulating for yourself why you need to work within this form. And um, yeah, that's how I deal with it. Usually, absurdity and humor and satire is a good defense mechanism um, for me.
Thank you. Two questions that are along similar lines. In your view, what distinguishes a good photo book? Is it design, sequencing, emotion, or provocation? And there's another question from Peter, which I lost. Okay, yeah. How do you approach sequencing photos for a photo book? Everything I've read about it seems to say photos will just feel better in a certain sequence. Are there other ways to approach sequencing?
It's so subjective. I mean, so I don't know how I would define a good photo book, honestly. I think there are so many different kinds of artist books and photo books and books that use photography. And maybe, books that I like or that I respond to are not things that other people would enjoy. For example, I love this little zine called Scapegoat by Ayan Faruqi, where he's got pictures of goats that he sees, in his town, and that's it. It's sequenced, in some ways spreads are they make sense, and other times there is no like narrative arc. But to me, it's great. It's cheaply printed. It is political. It's funny. It's honest, and that's one type of photo book that I love. Or this other book by Ajay Shankar called Hindi Effortlessly, where it's kind of like a textbook. Even the print quality, is kind of like a textbook, and it's got like the K, K, G alphabet, and then how you pronounce it, and a word that describes the image on the right side that starts with that letter. So for example, G say Ghamla, and then there's a translation of that, and then there's a picture of a Ghamla that he's taken, and his initial idea was to make this for as something for his wife because she's Polish. But I love the book. um a more a more, I guess, a book that's done really well in the world, and one of my favorite photo books um is a book by oh God, I'm getting really distracted, sorry, by Rinko Kawauchi, called Illuminance. And it's really, I mean, that I can't explain or describe that edit. It's very, so she, she kind of is a documentarian in a certain way because she lives with the camera as an appendage, and at least that's my understanding of her practice. And the book itself is kind of like it feels like a journey through life. You have these very quiet, soft observations about the world. Always the image is very sensitive to light. um some of the images are really beautiful, others are really shockingly grotesque, but shot in this beautiful way. And it's this kind of journey, like the ebbs and flows are a rhythm, almost like music, where you just, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say it any differently, but you feel it. And I think like a visual rhythm is something that you can create through how images can be associated. And to me, that's also a very, I mean, that is one of the most successful photo books in my opinion, and something that I keep revisiting when I need to kind of recenter, and just have like a sense of, calm. And so I love that book. Um, there are other books that work with more, you'll have like recall in later pages, and it'll remind you of something at the beginning. So you have to go back and forth. It'll have like a kind of like a what is that? Like a jump cut, edit type of thing in film. Dory, for example, I was thinking of like a documentary film when I was editing it, and so um I was thinking of how time can be stretched and compressed with how you place images in sequence. So, for example, there's one long sequence of my grandparents just in their bed, and it feels like like a burst of images, but it's over like just a couple of minutes. But then there are then it follows a much faster pace because it kind of shifts, like the scene shifts faster. So um, there are multiple different editing tools and devices one can use, and I find it useful to turn to cinema and music for guidance, sometimes theater also for guidance. Like we did a workshop with Sheena Khalid and Pooja Saroop of Patchworks Ensemble, where we invited them to develop a workshop on storytelling and narrative structures, but responding to photo books from the library. And that was really interesting because they were talking about, you know, um, narrative arcs in theater, and how, an epic is built versus a tragedy versus a comedy, and how you would place actors in the frame, how the tension would be created within the stage. But they applied all of that to the frame. And that was a very different way of thinking about, editing a book or telling a story. So, um, yeah, there's just no one way to do it. I think one can be as free and creative as you want to be.
Yeah, I think you also answered someone else's question, which was what are some of your favorite photo books? In case you'd like to add more to that.
I have many. One of my favorite books from India is a book by Chandan Gomes called This World of Dew. Um, it's no longer in print. But yeah, I absolutely love that book. You can look it up online. I'm not going to describe it.
There's another question, which is, seem to have lost it again. Sorry. Yeah. So, do you take an artistic approach for distribution, or is it mass produced? Considering at times these are personal stories.
All of these are in large print runs, so they were made for distribution. Um, I'm yeah, I mean, even within Aparna's book, there was, a short artist book uh, edition, and actually for Dori, we also have an artist book version of it, and it comes wrapped in a piece of my grandmother's sari. That's it. That's the only difference, So it's more like an object-based memory slash collecting approach. But I have not yet only made a small print run artist book. In fact, I'm working on one right now, but who knows if when that'll emerge. Um, but yeah, I mean, under JoJo, all the books are made for circulation and for, you know, yeah, for a wider audience. I mean, having said that, we've never gone over 500 copies, and that's mainly because of multiple constraints, monetary constraints, the ability to distribute, so many books, because it's still, I think, a growing market, at least for us. So, yeah, I suppose 500 is a large print run. You can call it mass produced. We do distribute ourselves, but then we also work with a publisher for our international distribution. Sorry, we work with a distributor for our international distribution, and we work with a distributor in India as well. So we work with Pressworks in India for local distribution. So they handle all our bookshop, uh, placements and stuff like that.
Right, thanks. Let's say while merging elements of photo book and graphic novel together, what are your suggestions on how much one should keep the imagery direct or it should be poetic when talking about political creation?
Um, wow, poetry and politics. I don't know. I think that something I've been thinking about in when I'm responding to politics is I'm trying to not um like I'm trying to not for it to not be propaganda, but a way to bring a conversation to the table, whether it's even two opposing sides. Some people who have argued, like, I don't even want to sit at the table with somebody who has, the opposite ideology. So I think my own approach is more an approach of processing and responding rather than being didactic. And it's also always trying to question my own bias. And, it's not always successful. I think Cake Cutting is a little angrier, Dance of Democracy is a little angrier than the previous books. But yeah, I think it's just it's a balance that you're going to have to kind of arrive at just by like looking and living with those works or those images on your wall and just trying various different combinations to see what works. You can look at other graphic novels that have, responded to more political topics and see how they've done it, whether through fiction or through, more um, autobiographical stories. Like I love Logic Comics. It's not really political, but it's the hero is Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, and I love it because it made me super interested in their work. But then you have Mouse, which is more like looking at like a fictional world, but talking about Nazi Germany. So that yeah, I don't know. There's different approaches.
Thank you. We'll take one last question. I think we're at 8:05 now, so with that we can wrap up. Smita Mitra asks, do you consciously engage with the process of double curation that happens for a photo book like Good Morning or even a project like in today's news, where the photos were curated first in a certain context before being decontextualized in the photo book?
Mm, yes, I think I really enjoy that. That way of working with images that exist in the world and to give it new meaning. Um, I think that, that act of shifting the meaning that was originally intended for the image is a kind of act of resistance, and it is a political act in itself. Even cropping, like somebody said to me recently in a workshop, cropping is an act of violence, and it is a gesture that you're making to, it is a violent gesture for a book that is talking about violence. And I do enjoy that. I enjoy thinking uh, about how these images live in the world and they can be revived or like given new life, to actually talk about something that they don't actually talk about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, there's also one more question from our team member, Preksha, which is about copyright and permissions. So, while working with found images, how do you deal with copyright and permissions? We're also an organization that deals a lot with images, and it would be great to hear from you.
It's hard. Like I mean, I credit the sources, but I think if if it's used in the context of an artistic intervention, I mean, I'm not the first one to do it. It's a generation of artists, generations of artists before me have worked with appropriation as a form of resistance and as art. So I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But yeah, I think it's, it is like my artistic practice is that intervention. So um, in that sense, if the context is sufficiently changed and the meaning of the work is changed, there is an argument to be made. But I've had this discussion with multiple people, and there are multiple perspectives, depending on which part of the world you're in, depending on who's reading the law, depending on how people, take to the work. So it's really, yeah, there is again no one answer to it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. So, with that, we close the session. Thanks everyone for staying back till the end and for such wonderful questions. And on behalf of
Something to that previous answer, because for in today's news, I had credited the newspapers that I had used, the first version, and actually the first ever review of the work was in one of the newspapers that I had taken images from and credited in the work. And also, one of the figures that I had cropped and used an image of in the book recognized themselves and they bought a book because of that. So it's interpreted. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for all these wonderful questions and for inviting me.